Наш трек называется «Проблемы использования».
Our track is called "The Issues of Using Open Source for Ensuring Security." We would like to talk about different issues that exist. To continue what our speaker was talking about, what is the best way to build security on open source, what the problems are, and how did you solve these problems. Our discussion will be divided into 3 parts. First, we'd like to talk about how to choose, how you see it when you approach a problem, then problems and how you use the problem, what is your experience of using it, and what are life hacks. And the third part, all the advice and tips we can give our audience. Let's start with a basic question. Nikolai, what are the goals in open source?
Раз. У нас культура в компании такая.
1, 2, 1, 2.
По большей части любим open source. Все задачи.
We just love open source and all the tasks that we need some surety and Kubernetes and database and SOC and upset. They're just all done in a proper way.
Есть ли какое-то, может быть, распределение, что какие-то области вы прям
There are some areas that are well controlled. Are you trying to tune them? Some other things. Do you prefer like vendor products? Vendors products, we give them in several places and expertise, and sometimes antivirus solutions, everything that has to do with CTI, and that's all we do and everything that vendor does. Mostly it's open source or our own solution. The previous speaker said, so we use a different technology. It's not we have vendors boxes. We use all enterprise solutions, Microsoft. You can't really go away from it. And maybe there are different ways they can use and quite close, and the big tech solutions they provide, and they have great expertise in technology, in some different languages of programming, and in some ways it's just easier for them to manage and fork them and maintain them and build some solutions on them. It's very similar, and some vendors also use it, and if we add it to where vendors may win, so yes, of course we support open source because it's expertise, and you need to find people who actually work on antivirus. So Ozon on the T-Bank, they don't need to T-Bank, they don't need to do antivirus. And I would add here spam and phishing, the models and big data and LCM protection, and they have database and attacks on different companies. So you can actually win due to a vendor who you studied and trained on different customers, and now they're doing really well.
Ну, то есть получается, что в целом, если говорить про экспертизу, вендор выигрывает и коробочное решение выигрывает.
Expertise and vendors and box solutions, they win because if they have the coverage of different attacks, it's bigger, they have big data they can analyze, and with a big they can find patterns, and a company can't do it on its own. I would add here this other thing. Open source, there were great questions from the previous presentation. Open source is not for free. That idea that you took it and it's not, we're using open source, but there are people and information security, they do it on top of open source so that it works. And they have to pay it because you pay salary to people who are actually supporting the project. For companies that are not as big, and like big ITs or big fintechs, maybe for them it's just easier to buy a vendor because they don't have to keep a team of people who will have proper expertise, because you have to find them in the market, you have to give them time to deploy it and to turn it into something ready to go. You just need to solve a certain problem with a certain solution, and you don't have to invent a bicycle here. I agree with you. So for SMEs, it's for them it's just easier to install a box and you get a quality product. For big business, oftentimes they encounter some limitations on vendor solutions. For what I mean, oftentimes we have a problem, and oftentimes we see that the cost of the license may go in space, like can soar, and we can't adopt solutions to our infrastructure. What I mean, for example, we buy a scanner, check marks, for example, and it's very hard to adopt it to our system of development, that we have our own. Runtime, GitLab, artifacts, everything that they need, it's in the single window. And in this window, it's very difficult to integrate any box. In terms of integration and how convenient this is, oftentimes I hear that the problem of using vendor solutions, they can't be integrated with our crutches that we use. Do you think it's justified to design something for yourself, something very convenient, and then you realize that you can't get compatibility with some important tools, so we don't have such problem, right? Well, compatibility, you mean? Well, compatibility, probably not. But it depends. It's important point here. Everybody who is listening to me, there is no ready answer. What's better? It's open source or vendor? There is a goal, and there is a vendor. So what specialists you have? You have developers and what technologies they know, and depends on the context, because it's individually. You can't say that in this company we did open source and it will work in a different company. No, it's not going to work this way. I wouldn't say that we're quite representative of vendors, because we have two big volumes to work with. Sometimes you come to a vendor and we have 1 million RPS, and we can't do that, they say. And because you have no way out, you have to do it yourself, and that's just the only way. And there can be problems of compatibility, and especially if on the open source base you take it and you need to figure out how to sync with other services. But at the start, you have to make sure that at start you'll have to invest more effort. Nikolai, I would like to find out from you. Do you have any advice or criteria? How do you choose between different open source projects? Because there are alternatives. And what you look at, firstly, you mean between different open source tools? Okay, we'll look at how well it can be maintained. Developers, do they participate in its development? How they respond to different issues? How quickly they can fix bugs? Of course, the number of stars. And mainly, if their stack fits us, can we maintain it? Can we adopt it in our company? That's the most important thing. So when you look at the project, you look at the stack too, or some examples. When it's a great project, but you don't have good specialists, and you are looking for specialists for this project, like programmers. Well, I don't have such examples though, but we have a practical open sources. This is Python Goa. We have both developers. We don't look at other ones. It's better if we write it ourselves. 5 years ago, when I came to Ozon, we used SSO, and it was a kick log, and it was standing out because it was written in Java, but we had Go expertise and 95% Python and front end. So, and it was quite painful, and one of the reasons why we changed this solution for another, because it was old technology, because it was quite painful to keep people who are doing certain tasks, who work in certain tasks, and it's very difficult to find such people in the market than the developers that can do it. So now that can be a reason that why we replace SOC of a big company. You said that did we hire developers for some stack technology? Yes, we did. We were writing our own host-based firewall, and we hired people who were experts in C and Rust. So we were lucky, we had those. So, scalability. Sarkis, could you tell us how you deal with this? How you resolve scalability problem with open source? Well, it depends on the project. When you say scalability, in other words, how is it failure free or and growth of the infrastructure? That depends on the particular solution. It can be an open source project, but in fact it was developed from the open source by a giant like Google. And a year ago I was talking about adding proxy, and they had the internal solution. And most of the issues they resolved using just a box solution. And it was a good team of developers. They made a product that could cope with great loads. But if it's a product that has a problem with scalability, then there is not much to do. It's either you use this product or you have to replace it. And since we're not representative and we have a big tech company and we are building a highly loaded IT business, and Ozon service is closely tied to big loads, and our open source solution can be tied to it, so they'll help us to scale it. We had cases when we got stuck with SOCs and big databases, so our resources were not enough. We would get colleagues to help us, and they would train our team, and they helped us to scale up. I would agree. It depends on the solution. If we take Kuber, we have 500 nodes in cluster, so we can't launch more. You just launch 2, 3, 4 clusters, and they work properly. But there is unsuccessful experience with open source solutions, for example, Diffig Dodge. So we installed it, we put traffic through it, and it immediately crashed, and we wanted to rewrite it. We looked at the code, and the code was so faulty that rewriting would take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and so we decided to write our own ISPM, and this is how we got it last year. What about contribution and back? So if you take open source project and if you publish something, do you have a return contribution in this project? Yes, we have contributions. Oftentimes we send bugs in some scanners, and we send it to SyncRep, and they successfully receive them. We don't always use this particular method, contribution open source. Sometimes we fork, and we just keep our own upstream. When we need to fix a bug or to add a small feature, and when we need to have a bigger base and to create our own stuff. But this upstream is private, right? Yes, it is private. And similarly, if we see a problem and we understand there's some sort of bug, that we're not the only ones that bump into it, so we can. It depends on terminology of the solution. It depends on maintainers, how quickly they can be engaged. But when I worked in SOC, there was a very popular project, Sigma. Even in Russia, they were trying to contribute to it and to add their contribution to it. And if we go to our own fork, because it was easier for us to fix it on our own. So how to do it?
Ведь мейнстрим нормально, мейнлайн развивается, и фактически тогда у вас вы разъезжаетесь.
So mainline is developing, and you may have to incur a lot of costs. You have to agree with yourself, sort of, that you maintain the project as a whole, or if you have this possibility, then you need to some sort of module solutions that it would be easier for you to move with kernel to an upgraded version of it. Maybe you'll have to rewrite some interfaces, connects, and APIs and stuff, but it's possible. If architecture solution actually allows you, yes, I absolutely agree with you, and if the solution that you get, and it's not, if it's written properly, if it's not some sort of second-hand solution. So when it's properly written, it's easier to maintain it, and it's not costly to get changes from the upstream. Or the other one, so it's going to take you pains to figure it out on your own, and it's very difficult. Or you do your own thing and you keep developing, forgetting that it was a fork at some point. Contribution topic and working with open source projects. Everybody knows that open source, it's more about community. It's about how people get together. Could you tell us about your experience about the community in open source? Do you feel the strengths of the open source, and then you communicate to these people? Did you have cases when the community helped you?
Сложный вопрос, многогранный такой.
That's a complex question. We closely communicate with open source. We have our lab where we have a lot of open source. Also, open source community helps us. There are brilliant things there, and Linux, that it took them ages to get where they are now. And that's all the merit of the community. Yes, and answering the initial question, do we communicate to the community? No, because there is open source community, kind of local one in Russia. But specificity of cybersecurity is that all know how they come from the West. They're like companies that used to work with Google or somehow related to Google, and they open source something that they develop it inside, and they just give it to the public. And we, as customers, we're consumers there, and this open source community usually is not in Russia, it's somewhere else. But oftentimes there are situations when we participate in such conferences or in foreign conferences, you may find somewhere, meet somewhere there, and there were situations where reporting cases and people were listening to us, and it was really great. An important point that our colleague said, that why open source is so good and why it's worth monitor it and look at it. if in Google all solutions are done, all the vendor solutions are bought, and everything is great, but some researcher or student may come up with something that before nobody thought of, and it can be quite simple, and they can share it. And based on this, people can share these enterprise solutions.
Мне в этой сфере нравится термин «мудрость толпы», когда
In this sense, I like this
позволяет найти наиболее оптимальное решение.
term crowd wisdom when they actually help you to find a good solution. Nikolai,
Хотел тоже добавить про
I wanted to add a little bit to it.
когда
It's called
компонент дает в итоге большее значение, чем
Emergency effect, when synergy, this is when people together can give you a better solution. Let's move to this holy war topic. So what is more beneficial, how to calculate your P&L and what you can comment? Previous speaker said that you can convert licenses, the payroll, and you as a big tech company, with developers, it's much easier for you. I would like to talk about it. In fact, with the previous speaker, he actually delivered this idea pretty well, how to calculate P&L. When it's beneficial for you or not, you have to decide what goal you would like to achieve and what result you need. And for that, you can look at the open source solution that is out there, and you can assess how much it will cost you to implement it and how much it will cost you to maintain this solution. The easiest thing is to calculate payroll. You calculate the number of people and expertise of people that you need, how much you're going to pay them. You multiply it by 12 months and you get the cost of it. And if you compare, and then you compare it with the license of a vendor. It's pretty simple calculation. And if you'd like to get an estimate. And here you need to take into account that whether you need to get a unique expertise that your company doesn't have. For example, Ozon,
руководство компании сказало: давайте мы экспертов по антивирусам наберем, это будет как-то очень странно. То есть это кажется,
the head of
заплатить людям, которые в это умеют, купить
the security would go to the management and said, so let's hire people who are experts in antivirus programs. And so that would be irrational approach, that you spend your resources to come up with your own virus program. So I would say that's a pretty delicate issue. So when we're looking for a solution where it's EDR or to protect your email, we pilot vendor solutions, and we also find strong open source solutions, and we share it with our vendors, and we show them the difference of open source in their solution and how we assess the functionality of what they offer and the one that we need. And we have like a speedy solution, and then we choose out of them. And then the criteria of assessment is after the testing. And then we get the assessment from in terms of functionality and what it does and how it's going to be maintained in the future. You need to calculate not only deployment of it, because for open source, the hidden part of the iceberg is how you're going to maintain it, and you need to be very careful calculating this and understand the risks of it. Nikolai? With the formula, I agree with this. So you can calculate payroll and license, and you add there the cost of the infrastructure, where it's going to go, and depending on open source or self-made. Actually, we don't look at P&L. For us, it's more important whether we want this expertise. Reliability is important, and scalability. This is what we look at, firstly. And secondly,
Ну, то есть, получается,
So it turns out that
набирать своих разработчиков, если у вас большой штат.
it's more beneficial to hire your own developers if you have
Чаще всего
a team of developers, and Stack fits that. Yes, according to our experience, yes. What
Не будем сильно
risks of open source we have? We're not going to go too deep into this, so it's security of open source in general. What risks you have with information security open source? Do you have any examples? The risk that one of the viewers said that analysis expertise, you can find a good product, you can invest into this product too much, and you can find and hire people who will be contributing to it. And of course, key risks, since it's products of information security, they're paranoid. And I'm paranoid from the point of view of the vulnerability of the solution, because it's going to be quite shameful if company will be hacked through the information security solution. So you need to look at all the dependence chains and all open sources that you implement. You need to go through audit of it. You need to look at all the hygiene that you use, and you have to look at it very, very carefully. And don't think that somebody looked at the product thinking it's a priori safe. For example, for me, the biggest risk as a security expert when you miscalculated the cost for the project in the future. When you liked it, you see that solution actually resolves the issue you have, but and then you can be prejudiced. You may miscalculate how much money you will need to support it and how many people you'll need for that. I really don't have anything to add. It looks like all risks are here on the surface. We spoke about them. This is vulnerability, license, conventions, and even in open source. Sometimes maintainer was changed, the owner of repository, and they added some backdoors to it. Security open source is not any different from others, so risks are the same. So if maintainer is tightening it up and if they're restricting the use of it, so did you have any cases? So what to do for the company in this way? So if they don't have a big staff of developers, they can engage in this. So there is no any miraculous way out of it. And it's quite a popular story, by the way, when a solution is put out there in open source, so first they let you use it for free, and then all of a sudden they add to the commercial part, and they sell licenses, they restrict the functionality, limit functionality, and there is a simple way out. You either accept the rules of the game and you play according to rules of the company and you buy the license. And sometimes when open source becomes commercial, they have kind of grading of the license, and it's cheaper anyway than vendors because it's a new solution. Or then you say, I'll hire developers who will support the fork of the solution. Or you say, I don't need this solution, I'll go and buy the ready solution that will meet my needs, and it's going to be cheaper for the company. Well, actually, there's no way out. Nikolai, you were saying about the same thing. So you were designing your own solution. How you make decisions what you want to give to the public or what you're going to develop within the company? The criteria are very simple. We release to the public what can be useful for the community and what we're satisfied with within the company. When the maturity of the product is there and we are ready to share it with the community. Some unfinished or unfinished products and some solutions that we can still work on, we don't bring up there. Because the maturity of the code and the fact that you can use a solution, this is the main thing. Why would you post something that similar solutions exist for? Because in our case, in big fintech, tech companies and ITs, no, we usually deal with tasks that are quite specific for us, and we look at what other companies can provide similar to us. There are some companies that say, yes, when we become big, so we may use what you have, or it can be some sort of know-how, say like a new research and super new class of solutions and some not so obvious class of tasks, and then you can share it, and then people on the base of it can do something. But on the other hand, it's very expensive to do it. And the idea, so why big companies don't open source everything? Say Google, oftentimes they ask Google about that. There are a lot of internal developments, and it's very expensive to support open source for open source and to support internal one for the companies, because you need to have not just one team, but better two teams that'll do different tasks for open source, and the priority becomes these communities who need to fix bugs and new features. And the second one, it's the goals and objectives of the business that you can, and then when it's going to branch out, it's going to be two different products, and sometime later it will be developing even faster. And the second answer is why big companies in Russia, they don't open source some of their solutions, because it turns out that Ozon, instead of their main business, they need to become provider of information security solutions, but it's a totally different story. And the number of developers and employees you have to have for that is just, but when it's inside, so there is synergy. We have great developers, architects, and engineers who have high load, and we can inside using our tools, we can resolve some issues, and it will work for us. How real this is to work with the development of the product in public. So it's not like we brought it, but on live you can develop it, because open source community, this is about you, that you don't provide the final product, you're working on it. I think it's real, you can do it, but with certain reservations. There's GitLab company, and GitLab is quite interesting. If you didn't know, all the internal processes, they document, and you can find them in public. You can see what they do, how they build their information security. And initially, the approach was built, so we're enterprise, but we'll do it from scratch. If from scratch you decide to be a company that supports this level of openness, then it's easy. But if you're so great as Ozon or some T-Bank, you have to rebuild completely and spend time and to bring to open source and then to continue with the open source. It's difficult. And why? Why would you do that? And also a certain culture within the company. We also use this path, and we started that when we have most of repositories private and closed. Now it's been 4 or 5 years when we have a different scheme. Everything is open, everything is accessible, anybody can come, anybody can contribute to a neighboring project or some other one. So I think it's like an interim state, so you have to set up an open source within your community, and then you can go public and contribute it. It's actually a great idea of internal open source community. Sometimes in your company, your own employees, they come with initiatives of projects, and before that we're discussing how the company looks at solutions of their problems using open source. But there is also this power that comes from your employees down up, from bottom to the top. looking if they can spend their time, or they can find time for new projects and contribute to the projects that you work on. As a security expert, I in open source community is board, a member of it. And we always get ideas from people who want to disclose something in public open source. Sometimes it's like the stream technology, so some languages, some libraries, some cool things. And everything that has to do with AI. And we have pretty strong AI center, and we have a lot of developments there. And Ozon, we have a process and procedure of going through review and requests to get to open source, and it works from bottom up. And then we have public repository of Ozon and GitHub. There are solutions that we open source, and there is a solution file Z, and we developed it on open source. And transport logs of AD. If some of you are familiar with Vector, it's the same thing. So, but it's more effective than Vector, and we have in SOC. We use it, and we use this as an open source solution.
Не так много решений, которые ты можешь вынести, которые действительно...
There are not so many solutions that you can bring up to the public community. They saw that there are not similar solutions, and they decided to resolve the problem of speed and load. And big companies actually do it too. They bring these perks to the public, and it's not just to motivate their own employees, but actually it's great for the brand of the company to show the people what they can do, and they share it. From the point of view of organization within the process, Nikolai said that you have a certain body that deals with open source. So we call it Open Source Program Office. So what about you? It's the people who just come together and they make a decision. Maybe I a bit overdid it when I said it's a committee or like a board. No, it's just a person who likes open source. He's responsible for it in the company, and there are a few more people of adjacent departments that they, for example, when they need to control what vulnerabilities they have. So there is no like a special body that deals with that. Yeah, the same thing. We have an instruction. We open projects in open source, you learn about it, you read the application, so you go through audit of information security, and then they bring it to outsource and maintain it. It's not that difficult as it may seem, when you actually have an understanding that the solution is ready to go. Today we spoke about solutions that are easier to buy from vendors and which are not worth doing yourself. But in your view, what do you think we are lacking? What projects you'd like to see, the project that you'd like to implement in your company? You mean from open source? Yes.
То есть, например, у вас есть какой-то пул проблем, вы такие, вот...
For example, you have a list of problems that you need to solve, and you look at vendors. Well, let me say, all of you remember the story when in 2022, when Microsoft left the country, one of the risks was, what if Microsoft decides to block all solutions in Russia? And my dream was that at some point there will be open source solutions of a high level in order to support a catalog. And because what we have today, it's very weak. And there is this vendor lock, and Microsoft took this position, and nobody. Well, there are some Western solutions that you can use instead of Active Directory, but except them, there is no any analog that could work with the same parameters, with the same pool of your working stations, and perform the function of catalog. We have self-written solutions here that can do that. The SIDM, central system of accounts. The answer is simple. Antivirus products, it would be great that they would have open source solutions that vendors wouldn't be flag, and at some point vendors are doing it, and if sometimes they can bring up something free, and it actually stimulates development for vendors and for open source. For big tech, one of the criteria when they chose us, when we were buying vendors, L7, for protection with maximum flexibility. We would like to control it fully, because in case of incidents and there is an emergency in the company, we have quite a strict time to fix it. So if something crashed, you have only minutes to restore the situation. When you have a box, when you can't really control it in any way, and you're sitting waiting for support to call you, and when support will respond to your request, it demoralizes you, and you see that you don't have control over your own infrastructure. To have open source analog of all the vendor solutions, it'd be really great that you have choice, that you can invest and you can develop your open source.
Насчет винды, кстати, немного офф-топа. Мы встали на путь отказа полного от
Windows. Off top. So we decided to get rid of Microsoft. We have a map of what to replace with what. In a couple of years we can meet and we can discuss that. We have a similar one, but right now it looks very complex and very costly. But we decided to move forward this way, to get rid of Microsoft and to see some better products in open source, some mature products, everything that Microsoft has. And if we're talking about information security, we have a lot of developments that we didn't manage to find quality ones in open source. So we had to develop our own. We host-based firewall. We also, these are the main things that we're working on. And I agree with you. My colleague was answering this. In fact, to implement the solution and develop solution, it's not that difficult. But what is the strength of open source is a community. And I think when they collect the expertise from people from all over the world, these are the rules, correlations and stuff. For example, when MITRE showed up there and everybody was talking about it all the time, because people with a collective mind, they came up with a list of techniques that the attackers use, and they described it. And I think this is the power of open source that is not fully realized. For if you take EDRs of open source, they give the code of agents that you launch, and the rules are very scarce, and to contribute together in the number of rules of detecting some strange things, or detectors for antivirus, or the models that can detect it. I think it's an open question for open source, and you can deal with this, you can share it, and I think it would be great. I mean that open source allows you to learn from collective experience and the data of many people. This is what the big vendors have. I probably have a different opinion. That's probably the only matter where we think differently. So I'm fighting for vendors. So in terms of rules of correlation and static analyzers and dynamic analyzers, I would disagree with you because community has a very broad view. When the company has a very specific one, the vulnerabilities are quite specific and the technology is limited, and everything that they will write in the open source, oftentimes you don't need it, and oftentimes it's of a bad quality. That's why we decided to move along differently. We select what we find in public, but we actually put more effort in developing our own rules of, say, correlation or other ones. So we have processes when post factum we found some vulnerability, we dig and find where it happened, and we write a rule for a certain tool. There are proactive processes. For example, we see that our tech radar, we see that the technology is growing, our framework. We go there to study it, we see what errors it has, and then we proactively write rules for our tools. There is no point to take what we have in public. This is what we decided. It's easier to write for yourself, from yourself. Okay, let's not go away. It's great to share what you wrote, and you need to all repositories with rules. There is YAM with a class of solutions, and I'm a person who worked in SOC. From me, the box CM for big tech, to buy it just for the sake of correlation, no point. 99% of those rules won't work in your infrastructure because you're big and you need to make them more concrete for yourself. But to share it with the community, like Micro, they wrote techniques, and people can choose what can be applied to them or adapted to themselves. Somebody wrote a basic detect and how to detect it for admin and for Active Directory, so we kind of forgot about it. It's a good knowledge library for starting some new open source. So what's written there is very important. You need to put it through a person, and you need to find the risks that are not applicable to you. Say you take repository with correlation rules for Microsoft and you don't have Microsoft, so why would you take it? And that's why I don't like this top 10, because they're going to hack you through the 11th vulnerability. So you need to know your company and what you protect in your company. And top 3 from each of you, top 3 open source projects that you think are great in information security. So what comes to your mind? That's a good question. SimGrep. Yes, it's great. Osquery. It's an example how you can make an agent to collect telemetry, and if it's a platform, you can take it and use it.
Мне нравится инфраструктура кубера вся. Там очень много.
I like all the Kuber infrastructure. There are many tools, security tools. Cilium, for example. It's a great solution for that.
Ну, кстати, вот мы говорили про EDR, даже Velociraptor.
Depository. When we're talking about IDR, Velociraptor is like an ideal solution. It's a great thing for SMEs, and it's free. When you take it, and you will have some EDR that you can work on. I like ClusterFast from Google for fuzzing. Sadly, we didn't manage to implement it in our company, and only because our runtime infrastructure was a bit tricky, and adaptation of ClusterFuzz was very expensive. It was cheaper to write our own. So that's another story of non-success and a good solution. See, the specificities are very different. So hear about more about SOC infrastructure. Sorry, with EDR, Google sooner than Velociraptor, they opened open source something response. This is what they released. It's EDR.
внутренняя разработка, которую они поделились и которая, кстати,
It's the internal development that they shared, and many people used it, and it was great.
ну, еще что-то прям такое.
Да,
По
да.
три.
Коллеги, у нас за вопрос на панели дискуссий также будет ценный подарок в виде книги, так что если у
So
вас
for the panel discussion, for the question, we have a good
можете задать.
present, a great book. So you can ask your questions to experts. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. I'm not to get the book. I would like you to argue about this statement. In Russia, they say, if in the West they buy products in IT and then they pay for maintenance and they use service of the company, the producer of the product. Here in Russia, they do it like this. Let's take it something from open source. We hire our own people who will be maintaining it, and we'll develop something of our own. And as a result, all companies they keep building bicycles, so to speak. So what do you think about it, and what is your approach? Maybe you disagree with this. May you have some hybrid solution.
Я бы, наверное, так ответил.
I understand the question. I would answer it like this.
Бум роста ИБ-продуктов у нас произошел вот в последние годы.
Information security boom, it's happening right now because Western products are not accessible anymore. So
Компании, они тоже
when you have a ready-to-go solution, and the big companies and the Western companies like Microsoft, they used to use
вот мы
open source. I would say this: it's not that we are like crazy about open source and want to use it and we write about it, but at the point where we're starting it, there was no vendor that could actually meet our requirements, and because of that, we had to do it this way.
мы поняли, что то, что есть
When we compared what is available in the market, didn't meet our needs, and that's maybe we're not a good example because we have very high demands.
и про тезис, то, что это каждый пилит одинаковый
And the statement that everybody is designing kind of the same bicycle, I'd say that if big tech companies, they sat together, and if you look at them, they're so different, all the solutions. For example, Ozon, this is marketplace.
инцидентами и рисками определенными.
We encounter incidents and risks of a particular kind. For example, T-Bank, it's more like bank. Ozon has a bank, okay, fine. But if you forget about Ozon Bank, so T-Bank is a T-Bank, and so they have more risk of their own. And they have a different story and the model of threats, and that's why the EDR is completely different. And if we started writing from this from scratch, it would be different. So threat models are different, but tools pretty much the same. Control plane going to be different, but the kernel itself
Это если у нас
will be very similar.
А если там виндовая инфра?
Ну, да, виндовой инфры у нас нету практически.
So if it's window infrastructure, then we don't use it anymore. So what else to add here? I don't know. I understand it, and it's interesting approach, and usually, in fact, it's the nature of IT landscape is that people, companies, they have to hire people. Then another question: you are
лаборатории Касперского и многих других.
clients of such companies as Positive Technologies, Kaspersky Lab, that buy information security products. You set the tone. Any order you want to make and you want us to fulfill. So you want us to give you the opportunity to write all the rules for catching attacks, or you want us to give you box solutions ideal and customize it for you and provide you the better service. So what level of control you'd like to have and would be ideal for you? I think the ideal mix would be when you write something of your own and then you take open source as a core, some scanning features and stuff, and then you enrich it with your analytics. It's very important. Us or you, we won't be able to give it as much as you can, for example. For example, you write some control plane to control it. So why it's important in our view? In this case, we can change the core and it will meet the requirements of scalability in terms of reliability and scalability. So we'll find our engineers who know how it works and we'll train them how to use this open source. So this open source approach and control plane, so I think it's ideal in my view. I'd say that if you choose from what you said, any business wants to buy something ready to go, but usually it's not the way it happens. And that's why when we want to get something from a vendor, we want to buy an expertise that we don't have. As I said, antivirus, and with specificity and heuristics, we don't want to touch that. For example, we buy L3 protection. How it works within food, it's not interesting for us. For us, it's important that it works with this. So the story with L3 protection. Actually, L7 is a good example. When it's a box solution, can fail you because it doesn't meet your specifics. And if you're unable to control it and if it's not flexible enough for you to control, then it's not going to work. Where it's possible to use a box solution, then it's great. But for us, it's very important that we could, if needed, we could add something or get rid of something. We need to understand what's going on in that box. Listening to the position of your colleagues and the person who is responsible for product and expertise, to you, Anton, what do you think? What should we do? We should have the open expertise and with a commercial core, so to speak, or we should be like an open core and secret know-how. And it's a disputable matter because I'm more for technology competition. Sarkis didn't say that all these detections that vendors hide. For example, today you didn't publish your detection and your colleague will be researching and will publish it and contribute to the community. Colleagues say they want to develop their own technology and they have their own customer experience. Say other companies, they can't hire experts of the same level and they won't be able to, say, add new things to the box solution. So it's different for each company. So summing up, what if companies that use information security products, if we give you open SDKs so that you could go inside our engine and the engine does some specific task in information security, and it will give you open SDK, you can write your own rules, automate something in your infrastructure, you can go as deep as possible in the specifics, and you can actually see the source of it. For some solutions, it's great. For example, WAF. Stack technology is very particular. This solution should be integrated with a proxy. And in order to make it integrated and not to... It didn't slow and didn't freeze, so we probably going to do it better because we have more experts for that. In other case, when we want to buy a service, so just give us the service and how it works, we don't care. Just so it doesn't affect our applications, it can crash our work. So let it work the way it works. So this dialogue with vendor, I think, why we have what we have. There are big companies And vendors, they design their solutions
Типа, а рынок-то он, рынок
for a
диктует.
bigger
В
market.
любом случае рынок диктует.
And the market
Такие вот
dictates
крупные, как мы, они
the
скорее вырваться
conditions.
из рынка. И
And
поэтому
such
получается
big
такая вещь.
companies like ours, we're sort of outside of the market, and that's okay. We just need to live with this. The time is up. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. If you have questions, people can come to the stage and ask these additional questions to you. Thank you very much.